Well, it brings us to the second panel, which should offer us the European perspective. Simon Lester has made a point that he has going to bring an American perspective, because he is from the Cato institution. Now I think we can comfortably argue that the next speaker will bring you the European perspective, because he comes from the institution which is directly responsible for negotiation on the EU side. That means from the DG Trade. As I told you before, unfortunately, due to our excellent, unexpected timing, that this is the week when the second round of the EU-US negotiation is being convened in Brussels, due to the postponement as a result of the US deadlock a few weeks ago. Ignacio Garcia Barcero, who is the chief EU negotiator, had to excuse himself on the last moment, although he was committed until the end of the last week to be with us, because as the chief negotiator, he has to negotiate, not to travel. But Ignacio has recommended, I would say, really valuable substitution. Lutz Guellner is a man who is responsible for the overall coordination of the EU-US trade and economic relationship in the DG Trade. And we had a chance to spend 2 hours at the lunch before the conference, and I can tell you that he's a really professional and is an experienced professional. Among others, he was a spokesman for Catherine Ashton and started to work with her when she was a commissioner for trade. Before that, he was also responsible for the coordination in the EU-Russia affair, so has also a different picture in his mind. Lutz was born in Munich, so he's a German. He studied political sciences and international relations in Freie Universität in Berlin, and also Sciences Po in Paris, so he's really the real European CV. And he has also the knowledge about the details of the negotiation, although maybe not all of them are directed for the public yet, of course. So thank you very much, Lutz, for coming to Prague. So, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sasha, for these kind words. And indeed, I meant to say, or to give my best regards from Mr. Garcia Barcero, who's the chief negotiator for the TTIP, who's exactly doing that, what he's supposed to do, that is negotiating. Because as we speak, there's a delegation of more than 50 representatives of the US government in Brussels, and is discussing a wide range of different issues. Some of them we have already talked about today. Some of them I will also present a little bit in my short presentation. What I want to do today is to give you first a little bit of context, then focus on what the TTIP actually, what promises it holds, And then I want to spend some time on one issue that Simon Lester already spoke about, the regulatory component. Because the regulatory component, as Simon rightly pointed out, is subject to many myths, to many sometimes misunderstandings. And I would like to show you a little bit our approach, what do we think we can do there, what is possible, and why it is also useful and where the potential benefits are. Now, first of all, is a negotiation between the European Union and the United States, does it kind of fall out of the sky? Does it come out of the blue? No, of course not. There is, on the one hand, a long history of attempts, and I think Sasha made an allusion to that in his introductory remarks, but there is also a very different context which has developed over the past 3 years. And I will not dwell too long about this, but just to recall a few things. The first one is that trade in times of economic crisis has a very different meaning because it is more and more seen as a tool, as an instrument, or as a contribution to overcome the crisis. And we have actually seen in 2010, when the crisis was in full swing in Europe, that trade made a massive contribution to GDP in Europe. And the contribution of trade actually helped that a nearly negative GDP growth, let's say, in Europe turned into a modest but nevertheless a positive one. So we're talking about, in that specific case, of a contribution of 0.9% of GDP. So there is a real substantial contribution, a real substantial benefit that we can expect from trade, and that has been recognized by the European Council earlier this year, which held a long debate about trade, about the benefits of trade, about the politics of trade, and which validated a very new trade agenda that the EU is conducting at the moment. A trade agenda which is, I can say here, is maybe the most ambitious that exists in the world currently. With all this, if we discuss trade issues, also transatlantic trade, also TTIP, I very often hear the concern, the EU is very weakly positioned in world trade. Why are you doing this? You put yourself into a difficult situation, and you will see when you negotiate with the United States, you will be crushed. And there, it is always important to recall that the EU is maybe the trading power in the world. We have a massive manufacturing surplus. Very often in the debates, again, it is called like the EU is not producing anything, is maybe and has a massive kind of deficit also on the or kind of in the current accounts. That is true if you look at the entire picture, because we have to import massively raw materials and energy. But if you look at production of industrial goods, services, and even, believe it or not, on the agricultural side, there's a surplus. So the EU is well positioned. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just to recall a few things, the single market is an enormous leverage that we can use. And in investments, EU remains as a destination and also as the origin, a top player in the top three. All this against the background, a very important background of increasingly integrating global supply chains. An export from Germany is not necessarily an export from Germany, but it is maybe 20% from Poland, it's maybe 20% from the Czech Republic, it's maybe 10% from Italy. And it goes also beyond the European framework, or beyond Europe or the EU in that sense. So we have an ever more integrated situation, and that also counts for the transatlantic market. You know that we have estimates, there are different numbers, but between a quarter and a third of transatlantic trade is actually intra-company trade. So you have Procter & Gamble that is sending around its own components from one factory to the other. We have BMW doing the same. And all the other companies that have a presence on both sides of the Atlantic. So there is a new kind of mindset that we need to keep in mind, or a new situation that we need to keep in mind when talking about trade in general and when talking about transatlantic trade. We have reflected this, first of all, with a quite ambitious negotiating agenda with a number of partners. Again, here I don't want to give you the full list, but we just concluded an agreement with Canada, for example. We're negotiating with a number of ASEAN countries, with India and a few others, economic partnership agreements as well. And since 2 years or 1.5 years, we have taken the decision also to negotiate with very important big industrialized partners, that is Japan on the one side, and of course, and that's why we're here, the United States. That is important for us. I think I will skip this slide because we have heard this. It was again to underline the importance of the transatlantic connection. And I know there are many books and many publications about this, how deep this integration is. And maybe the one element that I want to underline is not so much the trade in goods, but it's really the investments that exist. If you compare, I mean, there are a number of different comparisons. If you compare the level of investments, U.S. investments in the Netherlands, they are higher than the U.S. investments in China, for example, etc. I could give you many of those examples, but just to show you that this kind of investment relationship is playing in a totally different league, in a higher league. It's not a normal trade relationship. That is also to underline, on this map you see everything that is blue here all these countries have the European Union as their first trading partner. Everything that is green has the United States, and red, China. And you see the map, the world map, is pretty blue. So again, here, we should not kind of stick our head too much down and say, oh, we don't have anything to gain in trade. Well positioned, and a lot to gain. Now, coming to TTIP. We have discussed the TTIP, or a transatlantic trade agreement, or whatever you would call it, in different forms and shapes already for many, many years. Now it has materialized. Why? Of course, the economic crisis. The economic crisis has pushed all the governments into a direction of looking for sources of growth. Here we have a fantastic external source for growth, or of growth. And I think also one of the discussants before me said it, it's maybe not the most dynamic in terms of growth, but it's one of the most important in terms of volumes. And even if you have small tariffs, relatively small, 3% is not a big, but if you have a big volume associated to that, the reduction of 3% makes a big difference. But tariffs is not the only or the core issue here, what we are looking at. We are looking at regulatory issues, and I come back to that. Again, I want to make this a little bit more dynamic and come back to some of the elements that previous presenters mentioned. Simon Lester was talking about his doubts or concerns about numbers, and I personally share this. We have actually, from Commission side, a study, an impact assessment, which we are bound to do for every new activity, for every new initiative that we're proposing. We have to have an impact assessment. It gives you an order of magnitude of the expected impact. It is not kind of an ideological kind of goalpost. We have taken fairly conservative estimates, so we have not kind of looked at a reduction of regulatory barriers by 100% or a full integration of the EU and the US markets. And we come to a, to a very significant impact. We estimate that about 0.5% of GDP growth can result from a TTIP. Now you might say 0.5% is nothing. What do you want? 0.5% of GDP is quite a significant number. It's either to have it or not to have it. And we have translated this into disposable income per household. And we come, after all, to 550 euros, which is not nothing. Again, we have a few additional elements that I don't want to go into too much detail, but a very important point is that the benefits are not only for the transatlantic market as such, so for the US and the EU, But we estimate, and that is our study, our estimate is that there will be significant spillover effects, so that we have third countries benefiting from it. There will always be some trade diversion, of course, but we estimate that about approximately 100 billion of euros will actually be generated to the profit of third countries who will profit from this directly or indirectly. What are the components of this agreement? And you can have all sorts of forms and shapes in this. I want to cluster them in 3 blocks. Actually, this agreement has 3 main components. The first component is a classic one. It's a market access component that concerns tariffs, that concerns services, a number of other issues where you want to have access to the market of the other. But then we have 2 components that we have not developed in that sense with other partners, neither have the United States. That's a second component called the regulatory element. I come back to that. And a third component is called rules. And here, in this third basket, we want to develop rules that are important for the bilateral relationship, but that might be even more important for others, for third countries, to give a signal also to the outside world. What do we understand by that? We understand by that the WTO, which for us should still be the cardinal way of international trade, it's the institution, our commitment is absolutely staying for this institution and for this process. But we realize, of course, that in the current impasse, we have a choice to make. Either we don't do anything or we do something. We have decided to do something, and we insist on doing this in a way that we can use it at a later stage to import it, to multilateralize later on. How we do this, well, that depends on the issue, that depends exactly on the circumstances. I give you an example because the question was raised, or it came up, on energy trade. There is not a massive problem in energy trade between the EU and the US. There is a bit of an issue about kind of the export of LNG from the US side, but we would like to develop very solid trade disciplines for trade in energy products, which is not so much important, as I said, for the transatlantic, but also for others, because there are no kind of recognized rules in the WTO framework. Or the same on rules for state-owned enterprise, for example. That is something we would like to further develop on a bilateral basis, and then would like to give an incentive to others, to live up to the same standard. Now, I said I want to speak a little bit about the regulatory cluster, because that is something which is very confusing. It's extremely complex, but it holds actually most of the promises of this agreement. We estimate that about 3/4 or even more can come from this area. What do we think it is? First of all, I say what it is not, because that is something which comes up very often these days. It is not undermining or lowering any levels of protection in the sense that this is a race to the bottom. It is not hampering or putting the EU or the US into a situation where it's not able to regulate anymore. And it's not the imposition of the US system on the EU or the EU system on the US. What is it then? It is basically, it has 5 elements. You don't need to know all these by heart, but just to give you the full landscape. It is first of all what we call horizontal disciplines, cross-cutting disciplines. How do we regulate? How is participation? How is transparency organized in there? We also look at existing WTO disciplines like the technical barriers to trade agreement or the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, and want to extend them, want to make them clearer, want to make them more transparent for both sides in the interest. And then we would like to look also in very specific concrete sectors, and I will mention a few in a second, where we can reduce I don't want to say the administrative burden, but where we want to reduce divergences that exist. And for all this, we need to have an institutional framework. Now, coming back, regulatory coherence. What is this? That is something, first of all, where we have three main aims. We want to see how, when we regulate on the EU side and the US is regulating, how we can look at converging or kind of working towards also international standards, how we can bring the whole system a little bit higher. The second thing is how we can put in place a system that the regulators, who are not used to speak to their colleagues in other constituencies, if you want, how we can make them work together, how we can make them develop a reflex, more or less, to think, okay, if I do this, what impact will it have on the other side? Or kind of best practices. Maybe I look what the Americans have done in this field. It could be useful for us as well. So important is always here that legislation, whatever legislation we put in place, and which will then be followed up by implementing regulation, that we have space to see or to avoid divergences. Now, you would call this a little bit abstract. It's not as abstract as you think, because the list of divergences is long. The divergences come from a whole range of sources. There is one source of divergence which will not be able to be dealt with in the TTIP, and that is where there are fundamental political or societal choices made. That is, for example, in the food safety area. You know these examples of hormone beef, for example. Hormone beef is not allowed in the EU, and the TTIP will not change anything in these negotiations about this. But what the TTIP can do is look at the areas where we have divergences, which are maybe not motivated, which are not kind of intended because of different processes, because of different bureaucratic traditions, because of different instruments that are used, and that is exactly where we want to look at. And that includes kind of general issues, but also specific sectors. In our view, we would like to see these negotiations produce not only an interesting mechanism for the future, which we need, but we would also like to tackle a number of these divergences and reduce them, abolish them, make them more compatible wherever we can. And that is, for example, in the area of cars. It was mentioned already. That is, and I can give you more examples, but in the area of pharmaceuticals. To give you a specific example here. In the pharmaceutical production process, every pharmaceutical plant needs to be inspected. There are international rules called the Good Manufacturing Practices. At the moment, a pharmaceutical plant is being inspected by European inspectors, and it's also being inspected by American inspectors, just to certify basically the same thing with the same method, but just a duplication of things. Why not looking at possibilities here to bring this together, to recognize exactly that certification process? We have similar issues on medical devices. And even if you take one sector, which I didn't mention here, on chemicals, we have very different fundamental regulations on chemicals. The idea is different. So we will not be able to kind of converge at the general level, because our REACH legislation and the US TSCA legislation are very different. But where we can work, and that is sometimes a little bit overlooked, is a level lower. So where we have a process, how are chemicals for testing, how are the priorities set? How are chemicals, what are the requirements for labeling? How are chemicals classified? Just technically, not so much whether they are allowed on the market or not. It's all this, where there is a lot of double burden for companies, for business, and even for regulators, because they need to do two things twice or sometimes certify again. That is where there is a lot of leeway, where we can reduce a lot of costs. That also applies to another sector which was mentioned, financial services. We believe on the European side that we should include financial services, in particular, first of all, the market access element, which is given, but also on the regulatory side, because we believe kind of creating certainty on both sides, have the regulators kind of work together and have also under a certain, I don't want to use the word pressure, but a certain framework to work together will be conducive to the EU and the US. And then we need institutional provisions. I think that was mentioned already. How that is done exactly is a longer discussion. I also want to come back now to this element of, is TTIP only a bilateral initiative? No, it is more. The TTIP has what we call a strategic element there. First of all, we believe that even in the regulatory side, where we create kind of more convergence between the EU and the US, we actually can also do something which is interesting for a broader set of countries, or maybe for the entire world, because we can use approaches, new solutions, regulatory solutions, at a level that others might be able to join or want to join because they find it attractive. And even in many cases, it will be interesting for them from an economic perspective. And I spoke already about the other elements, and that is the TTIP, in our view, should also make a contribution to the further development of the WTO rulebook. I mentioned the energy and I mentioned state-owned enterprises. So this is not just a trade agreement as such. It is a trade agreement, but it has, just by the sheer size of the two partners, quite a significant impact. The main challenges, we have discussed a few of them. I'm not reading all this out here, but you see that there is a lot of complexity in these negotiations. It is a number of approaches that we have, very different mindsets, very different traditions on both sides, but we still believe there is a lot of overlap, there is a lot of things that we can do despite these challenges. Now, what is the way forward? First of all, we believe the process is well on track, how we see now with these negotiations. The next round is already scheduled. It will take place in the United States in the week of the 16th of December. We have foreseen a very high rhythm of negotiating round every 6 weeks, basically, which is also unseen in trade negotiations. And the key to all this is and remains two things. The first one is support. Support in particular from those who believe this is a good thing, because they are the business community and they think they can win, or they are stakeholders in the broader sense, and I think this is good also for a broader kind of context. And we need political support from the politicians, from the highest level, because we have seen over many, many years that working on regulatory issues, which is not a classic negotiation, but which requires kind of trust and confidence, that this can only be done with a strong kind of support from above. I think I stop here. I hope I was not too technical, but for me it was very important that you understand this regulatory dimension of these negotiations, and I'm happy then later in our discussion to come back to some of these points. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And the second speaker, I don't know whether this time will be from the European or a European perspective, but certainly you know Lenka Zlámalová, a journalist and economist who extensively is writing in the last couple of years on the economic issues with the European flavor or the European logic, so it was natural to invite her for today's panel to accompany and give us some comments. How do you see the European policy regarding the free trade? How do you see the EU policy regarding the purpose of this exercise? That's are you optimist? Are you pessimist? How do you see that? So please, Lenka, take the floor.
Thank you very much for invitation. As Sasha mentioned, I really want to speak slightly about some context of all these issues. So I'm commentator, I am economic writer, so I am not a businessman and not official. So I try to be quite more relaxed than previous speakers. So I think that this debate is right now getting in a really good time, because there is a lot of quite dangerous discussion about trade imbalances, not only inside Europe, but generally. As you probably heard last month, there was quite deep discussion about all these current account imbalances, and even International Monetary Fund trying to push big exporter, which is Germany, to lower their export power and some kind of regulation of export power. So it's according to me quite dangerous position, and it's some kind of atmosphere for really protectionist feelings and tastes. So I think that pushing all these stuff, Euro-American free trade area, is very important, and it's necessary to be quite fast and showing people that it's really good for jobs, for growth, and that this is one of way going out of economic and social crisis in Europe. Because there will be quite strong enemies, even in business. There are some fields in business which are for which companies there is no there are not only advantages from free trade. As our previous speakers mentioned, energy. It's very interesting right now, because all of you know that differences in energy prices between US and Europe, and especially European Union, are huge right now. Of course, it's because of shale gas and natural oil, and I think that if there will be quite fast development of technology, and if there will be easier export gas from US to Europe and another part of countries, there will be quite high pressure for big oil and gas companies in Europe generally. So it's not, and they are usually very strong lobbyists in this field. So I think that we can see some contra process. Contra free trade, especially in energy area, according to me. As our previous speaker mentioned, so he spoke from all EU perspective, but I think that big dangers are really different approaches. Some EU countries, we have very strong traders and free traders in EU. There are North countries, Netherlands, Germany, all these countries with big current account surplus and with big export surplus. On the other hand, we have countries which are no such strong traders and which are quite afraid about impact of free trade. So, of course, it's South Europe, and as Lutz mentioned, it will be very important to have strong support from politicians. And I'm quite afraid that it will not be so natural as we expected right now. And this is one point. As Simon mentions, very important area of services. Services are more than 60% of GDP in many EU economies, and even more in US. And even in European Union right now, there is no practically free movement and free trade in many services, and it's because of these regulatory burdens and this starting business in many countries, and because of these barriers. So, I think that the discussion about TTIP is also a good chance for European Union pushing their own homeworks in service liberalization inside European Union. Because, as you know, free movement of services is practically impossible in many countries. There are very strong requirements which are very difficult to achieve for many foreign companies. There are some very regulated branches. For example, law and law firms are quite strong regulated in many countries. There are chambers which are obligatory for many businesses, and it's in many other areas. So I think that this is very good possibility for European Union to pushing this agenda because of agreement with the United States. I think that financial services are any other important subject, because in financial services right now there is a huge discussion about banking union and common regulation in European Union, and many countries are afraid about impact of this regulation and also financial transaction tax. All these issues are strongly related, and I think with development of these issues, it will be very closely related with progress in EU-US trade agreement. I hope that inside European Union there is more supporters of free trade than countries which are by feelings much more protectionist. And also I really appreciate Simon's remark that under flag of free trade there is quite a huge space for protectionism. It is very counterintuitive, but it's right in terms of some social regulation, labor regulation, and some requirements for doing business. Hopefully there will be deep debate about this danger. We have same experience from inside European Union discussion, because many environmental standards, social standards, consumer protective standards are selling people as necessities for free trade inside European Union. And I think that it's very important to regard all these dangers in trade debate, because there will be very strong pushing and lobby group against those improvements and lowering regulation and much more supporters of free trade will be pushing on other positions by those which feels that for them it's quite dangerous, because maintaining of their monopoly or oligopoly position in their countries on specific areas. We can see which areas are much more sensitive than others. there is, of course, energy, there are financial services, there are also IT and telecommunication services. So we will see development of this debate, and so that's my commentator's perspective, and we can debate all these dangers and point of interest right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that in basically all major contributions we could recognize that there is some devil hidden in the detail, that on one hand there are certainly those very promising issues, this classic liberalization of the trade, means dismantling tariff, non-tariff trade and services barriers, opening up the public procurement. On the other hand, there is this regulatory complex as a part of the cluster, where we have to differentiate, what is really the free trade and liberalization agenda promotion, and what is, on the other hand, the protectionism under the free trade flag. Opening up a debate, and we'll give you also the chance now to rethink your questions or comments. I will start asking Lutz, but a little bit from a different area, more political than, let's say, classic free trade argumentation. And using, you are a German. This agenda was very much inspired by the German contribution. 2007 Transatlantic Economic Council was basically Angela Merkel victory over the French protectionism. And now the talks, the real negotiating started, so it lasted almost 6 years. And we are in the beginning. So first is about the timetable. Some of you has mentioned the Canada EU agreement, which was just finalized in substance, and it took 4 years, I think. So in the light of the complexity of the EU-US relationship, contrary to relatively easy Canada-EU relationship, where France has a special motivation to conclude it because of Quebec. On the other hand, we know the history of the Franco-American disputes. What is your estimate about the timetable? I know that you have to tell as fast as it's possible, but whether you can be as open as it is possible. That's number one. And number two, which is even more political. And again, you are a German. Germany was a great promoter of this in the past. But right now, when we are all clouded with this Snowden espionage affair, which is in particular sensitive in Germany, and we know, due to the history why. But still, how much it can influence the debate. What is your view on this? And I would go even more far. Just, for me as a little Czech, with all our experiences and sensitivities to those issues, my first comment when I have heard about Snowden is, look, this guy has to be a Russian agent, and the mission is pretty clear to establish a war between United States and Europe. And just reading the European newspapers, listening to the debates from Germany to France, from UK to whenever, I did not hear this argument. And it was first what came to my mind. It has to be a Russian agent with a special mission to destroy this agreement before it is completed. What is your view?
I don't know where to start, whether I start with a Russian agent. No, I start maybe in kind of correcting you a little bit. I don't think that TTIP is a German agenda. I think it's very much a European agenda. Of course, we have very different kind of strength of the different economies in Europe. But do not forget that we got our mandate to negotiate unanimously by all the 20, at that time still 27, because it was before the 1st of July. And there is general support of the European Council for that. And why is Germany specifically interested? Because of its enormous export machinery, of course. Now, when we discuss TTIP, when I go to different places in Europe to discuss with people, some of them tell me, we're not exporting to the US, so it's not so interesting for us. But then it turns out that a significant part of the export of that country in question is then going to Germany, exactly into the German export machinery. So in the EU single market, you cannot say anymore this is good for Germany and not good for the others, or good for that one and not for the others, because everything is so interconnected. And I'm very, very adamant about this, because the integrated trade flows is a reality in the single market, and we need to keep this in mind. The second thing is on the timetable. Well, now you put me, of course, a little bit into a difficult situation, because I would answer exactly along the lines that you suggested yourself. But let me try to make it a little bit more complex. A trade negotiation is an extremely, especially of this kind, is an extremely complex undertaking. I don't know how many rounds we will have, but we are approaching now the third round, and we think we are still fairly in the beginning of these negotiations, although we get already to quite substantial issues now. And we think after the third round is already a good moment to do a sort of political stock taking. You know, is this going into the right direction or not? We believe that until the end of next year, we should be in a good position to judge not only how far we can go, but whether there's a political package possible, a political agreement around this possible. We will do all our best to kind of do this in this year, 2014, but we all know that this is very ambitious, that this is the aim that we are following. Now, the much more difficult question about the data privacy spying issue. Trade policy, I also have a teaching assignment at a university in Germany, and I always tell my students, trade policy is policy. It's not trade technicalities. It is, especially trade policy of the 21st century, is not only about tariffs that are negotiated in some green room in Geneva that nobody understands exactly what these people are doing there. We're talking about fairly deep-going issues which have far-reaching into a domestic policy area. And we see this on issues like food safety, like consumer protection, and a few other things. Hence, trade policy cannot be totally isolated from other things. The NSA affair has, of course, an impact atmospherically on these talks. You couldn't deny that. I don't want to comment now on or qualify the comments in Germany or in other areas. You know that in Spain there was also quite some discussion about this issue. But the one thing that I can say here is that we need to differentiate also the different kind of discussions. We cannot pack always everything into one kind of box. And we believe that spying is really not an issue that can be addressed in a trade negotiation. You know, this is a very different channel. Data privacy, same thing. This is not kind of a negotiation in a classic negotiation as we want to do it with the TTIP. Data privacy is something where we have clearly established levels. There will be a process, there will be a discussion, or there is a discussion ongoing with the United States. We don't think it's in there. So for the time being, we see the political impact in terms of trust, that we need to have confidence also that the other partner, we can trust the other partner. And that is where the political momentum, since you asked about the political momentum, comes from, specifically if we talk about the European Parliament and others. And I fully recognize the political dimension of that. On the other hand, as far as the negotiations are concerned, we shouldn't mix too many things, and the data privacy issue is separate, let's say, from these negotiations. That's, I think, as far as I want to go here.
Oh yeah, I see the hand there.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in Prague.
Please, loudly. Yeah, more loudly. We cannot hear you.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in Prague. I have just one simple question, because we are in Prague, in the Czech Republic, and our political system right now is not on our way. So we have, for example, of my opinion, bad political side. So the first of all, I want to ask, how you want to make the Czech people change opinion of Czech people that make a free trade between USA.
Please.
Continue.
It does not work, the microphone, or?
Yeah. It wasn't heard correctly.
The visa issue, maybe.
The visa issue.
Visa.
Yeah. Yeah, or registration forms. Yeah.
For example, for USA it's like 90 days. You can go for free, like students or for businessmen, special form. And after, if you have free women in the USA and the Czech Republic, after people they can go free way. How it's combination with trade and trade.
Before Lutz will think about the response, just I can mention one thing: how this free trade talks could have a positive impact on the visa waiver situation, and that brings us with Canada. You have heard that Canada is getting to open the access to abolish the visa duty for the Czech citizens, and I'm pretty sure that this is the side effect of the conclusion of the EU-Canadian free trade agreement. On the US, certainly it's important for those countries who are not still part of the visa waiver program. The Czechs are, so our access to the US is relatively easy if you compare this with Poles and other Eastern Europeans. So certainly, I think in Warsaw they are believing that it can help them to get the nominal visa access. Jan Milford was the second.
I have a question for Mrs. Zlámalová. I like what you said about the aggressive export. I was actually last week invited by the French Prime Minister, and I spent a couple of hours with his advisors, and everything was fine. It was discussion about the French competitiveness for the future. Everything was fine till the moment when I started to protect, Germany, right? And I tell you why. I tell you why I did it, because I was hugely critical when I was living there between 2000 and 2007. I was openly critical to the German government, what they were doing, whatever. But it's true that they did all, reforms, and it was done by the Social Democrats. I apologize. Once I've got a, 101 with Gerhard Schroeder afterwards, I apologize. They did all reindustrialization. If you look at the World Economic Forum survey on competitiveness, they are more competitive than the United States. And last but not least, like the real wages didn't improve that much last 12 years, So we are talking, and obviously Angela Merkel, I think she is the best sales manager of the Germany. And everybody can have a leader with the sales skills, right? And, French people telling me like they are too aggressive. It's like playing football with your team and telling you, you are attacking us in a too aggressive way. It's a competition, right, on the other hand. So my question is, what is your, opinion on this? Because I think there's even push from the U.S. now and International Monetary Fund that this approach is too aggressive. But come on, if Germany would not be aggressive in export, we would not survive these countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and so on. And it's a competition on the other hand, right? So I would like to be interested very much in your opinion,
In this question...
Closer to the mic, please.
Yeah. It's better? Yeah. In this question, in this issue, I am completely German. I am completely on the German side because I know all these French arguments. Yeah, they are quite old and they are same. Yeah, French are very reluctant to making same reforms as German did in last maybe 10 years. It's better to say. And passing this many years with real no growth of real wages. Yeah, I can't imagine this kind of policy, especially under current socialist government in France. Yeah, and as you mentioned, reindustrialization. That's not only a case in Germany right now. It's right now taking place in the US because cheap energy prices. And I think that there will be a huge discussion about this in Europe because there are only not so many countries are able to make German way in this style. And I think that the pressure from countries with, let's say, French opinion will be quite huge, and there will be quite a strong senses to protect those markets. Yeah, I'm quite afraid because of it, and I was how to say, completely shocked by this opinion of IMF. Yeah. But German opinion is
No. It's not the German opinion. I'm speaking as a European Commission official, just with my European hat on. But coming quickly to my German side, I'm not only German, I'm also Bavarian, and we have the same debate within Germany. So just to reassure you, this is kind of going into levels, and then you have Munich against the rest of Bavaria, etc., etc. But I wanted to come back to this excellent question about free movement of people. Again, here, you have to be very, very clear in what you are discussing in which forum. Because free travel has to do with immigration very often and is a classic, what we call a home affairs issue. Is it the right place in the TTIP? Most probably not. Is there a link? Of course, because we look at business travels, for example, and for those of you who know trade, we have in services, for example, the delivery of services has different modes, and in our technical jargon, we call the mode 4 is the movement of key personnel. And of course, issues like that need to be looked at in the TTIP. But it will not kind of discuss visa issues at large, but whether there's a dynamics or not, that needs to be seen. But Sasha made the comment on Canada, and that is a dimension one needs to keep in mind, of course.
Questions? Yes, Simon.
I have two related questions for Lutz, related about this regulatory cooperation idea. Can we look for models for what the US-EU might do in either the CETA, the Canada-EU Trade Agreement, or in what I mentioned earlier, the US-Canada Regulatory Cooperation Council? I don't know if that's something you've looked at before, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts.
it's all, what we did with the Canadians will work exactly the same way with the United States, because the systems and the regulatory systems of Canada and the United States are quite different. And to give you an example, conformity assessment, for example, in the, sorry to be a little bit technical, but I want to illustrate it for you a little bit. Conformity assessment, so the body that certifies that you are conform with the regulation in the EU, for example, is connected to a public oversight, to a political public oversight. In Canada, it has a very similar system. In the United States, there's no such system. It's a private kind of based system. I'm simplifying. So while there are many areas, approaches that we have done with the Canadians will certainly be of use to the TTIP as well, I would be careful in kind of copying the one or the other kind of one-on-one. But of course, every experience is important. And just coming back, it's not only our agreement with Canada. If you look at the EU single market, for example, EU single market has not developed overnight. It's a long process, and you know all about this also in the domestic debate in the Czech Republic. You mentioned services liberalization, which is not fully there, let's put it like this, objectively. There are many other areas. That is a progressive kind of development where we also, I mean, I'm speaking now from the European perspective, where we have learned how we can kind of bring regulations closer together, despite very different bureaucratic, historic, or other administrative experiences there. It is possible, it is complex, but we need to do that. The one thing is, of course, it's not, how can I put it, it doesn't kind of grab the headlines, if you do a regulatory cooperation. It's not on page 1 of the Financial Times if you have an equivalence agreement. But that's where the real kind of value is. I don't know how many of you in the public are kind of representing business, but if you look about the different requirements and administrative hurdles that you have to do to export either within the EU or beyond the EU, you see that a lot of this is actually coming from fulfilling conformity assessments and whatever, all these issues. And that's exactly where we want to make progress.
Good evening. My name is Bogdan Neagu. I'm the Deputy Head of Romanian Embassy. Bogdan Neagu, Deputy Head of Romanian Embassy. My question is, how would you see the impact of TTIP on the euro-dollar exchange rate?
Thanks. Good question. I have been in February in some seminar in European Central Bank, and there, and there was a huge debate about this exchange rate. I think that it will be quite a long process, and I am convinced that this issue will have a huge impact. As you remember that many in Europe, especially in France, were quite angry when Fed lowering exchange rate of dollar, and they were strongly against strong euro. And there was a huge discussion about some intervention, decreasing value of euro. Especially French President François Hollande pushed quite strongly for this option of ECB. So I think that it will be issue, this parity or between dollar and euro. But I can say for which currency it will be advantages and for which one it will be disadvantages. It's a long process, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Daniela Chalaneva from the Anglo-American University. I would have a question for you, Mr. Guellner. About the regulation, I know you have explicitly, or you haven't explicitly mentioned the principle of mutual recognition, and that's an exclusive EU thing. But I wanted to know whether there is any consensus emerging as to how to set the common regulation between EU and the US, whether there's going to be some kind of bottom line for both groups, or whether the certification or whether the standards that you have been talking about, whether you would be able to adopt some kind of mutual recognition of certification across the Atlantic. Thank you.
You have a lot to do today, huh? No, thank you again for that question. The regulatory elements, the regulatory cluster, is so complex because you don't have one instrument, you have many instruments. And you don't have only one sector, you have many sectors. So the easy answer to any question that you will ask me will be, it depends the sector and it depends the instrument. But what we want to do is, and that is also what my friend Peter Chase always says, is kind of we have so many different possibilities of doing this regulatory compatibility or promoting it. That's kind of full harmonization would be kind of the royal, kind of the most advanced way if you want to do that. That is very unlikely in a transatlantic kind of context. Then the next step is mutual recognition. The next step is equivalence, kind of certification of equivalence or equivalence recognition, and etc. You can climb down the ladder. There are so many different things that can be done in terms of avoiding duplication and in terms of recognizing, not in terms of mutual recognition, but recognizing that the other system wants to produce or is actually producing exactly the same results as yours, but just with a different kind of approach. Very often, the approach is not only different, but also the result is a tiny little bit different. And the political judgment in all this is to say, is this kind of significant enough to say that the other approach is not justified? And I could give you hundreds of very, very boring examples, and I give you one, and I hope you don't fall asleep. It is about seatbelts in a car, for example. The way you buckle your seatbelt in the US and in the EU are different, you know? Does that lead to a situation that a US car, a US seatbelt is less safe than a European one? That is the political question here. And that is the question that the regulators then need to sort out. How do you do this? You need the data. You need to justify any change in regulatory practice. And that can then lead to the different levels that I described. It can be either a conformity assessment type, it can be a recognition of equivalence, can be a mutual recognition, it can be all sorts of things. We have more chances in certain sectors like cars, where the situation is very, very similar, and a little bit more complex in areas like, but still important industries like chemicals that I mentioned, where we will not kind of accept, we as EU, the US standards, which we find kind of not adequate or not comparable to ours, but, and I come back to the example that I gave, the way we kind of test, for example, chemicals, you know, just the way how you do this can be very different. And I've been personally working for 2 years on the Transatlantic Economic Council, and I can believe you, this is a level of technicality which is mind-boggling. And of course, no politician is very eager to hear about systems, how you buckle your seatbelt, you know. This is not kind of, again, this is not Financial Times kind of front page, and it's not kind of Angela Merkel getting excited about this, or José Manuel Barroso. But if we kind of have enough, let's say, a critical mass of all these different things that we want to piece together, then we can do something very significant.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think you have made a very interesting point now about the need, you know, to find the smart, I would say, the balance between the interest for the free trade, which contributes to the prosperity, public health, etc., and on the other hand, quite often obsession with safety and all that, something what I, as a heavy smoker, would say the smokers' free trade dilemma. On one hand, we can eliminate all quotas on cigarettes, we can eliminate all tariffs on cigarettes, we can even achieve the open public procurement, so no American Buy Tobacco Act. But on the other hand, you can establish a situation when you are not allowed to smoke anywhere. So with that conclusion, I am inviting you for a second coffee break. And those who want to smoke, the second courtyard